Hi. That's awesome.
Technology, eh?
How you
Well,
doing?
here we are. We're all good. Yeah, good. Thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. Have you had classes already this morning?
Yeah, I have. I've had year fours today. We did some whole class trombone, and then we did some improvisation with rhythms and some composition. It was great.
You're the head of the elementary music department at St. Andrews. Yeah.
And the teaching here is just so diverse. I'm really lucky. So I teach from the very youngest kids to our oldest on this campus, which is year 6. So they're aged 10 and 11. So in one day, you could be teaching 4-year-olds and then 11-year-olds and then doing whole year group singing. That's 200 kids in one place, just trying to get them all to sing together. So it's a really interesting
Wow.
job. And I have fantastic teams. So we all kind of share out all of the responsibilities together, try and keep smiling, enjoy making music with the kids. And yeah, a huge departure actually from where I started out teaching.
The SEAL.
Really enjoying
it.
The SEAL school. Yes.
I was looking, I was curious because obviously we met through the big gig in Kobe, because you had told us as a whole group, and we chatted a little bit about how you had come across musical futures, which is what really you were speaking mostly about in the big gig, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I started to think, well, okay, how long have you been teaching? And then I saw that article from The Guardian from 2013, and I thought that was amazing because, well, part of it is the fact that it's 11 years ago and what you were saying there about it really being a game changer for you. And I thought, how far does this go back? 1998, the SEAL School.
Oh my goodness, yeah, you've done your research. That's right.
Yeah, so a little bit about your teaching experience just before 2013, I guess, when you discovered musical futures. So maybe if you'd like to, you could explain sort of what you were doing before that point, and then how that experience of finding out about musical futures changed your musical life, you said in the article.
Yeah, well, very much so. And actually it is all intertwined, because I think as educators, we're all on a journey. And the journey doesn't stop when you discover the approach that works for you. It doesn't stop when you're in a school for a while. You just keep learning all the time. And I think there's so much in that, which is really where the big gigs come into it, because the big gigs, no matter who you are, where you come from, what your experience is all about coming together through these experiences of making music together first and foremost, but then thinking about the position you're in with your students. We might come to talk about that later. But actually, for me, I've been on this huge journey a lot longer than 2013, because I was very fortunate that I was in a state school in the UK. So I originally taught high school, secondary school, age 11 to 18. And the SEAL school was my first job. I was the only music teacher in the school. It was a school in a very socially deprived area, hadn't had a huge history of music, and I was 22, straight out of teacher training, really very young and inexperienced in terms of working with these big teenage kids who'd come from a very different background to me, both socially and musically as well. And having to just find my feet completely thrown in at the deep end, running this department and working with these kids. So I had a great experience there, just learned a huge amount, made lots of mistakes like we all do when we first start out, but also just really learned how you can bring music to life for kids. But actually, in order to do that, you have to change your own perceptions of what music education is. And sitting in front of a room full of 30 teenagers with no interest in music or no prior experience in music, the way that I was looking to teach it, that's not to say they didn't have interest in music generally, but I lifted my own formal music education and tried to put that into the classroom, as many of us did in those days, and very quickly realized, no, that's something's going to have to change here, and it's going to have to be me. The way I learned one-to-one clarinet lessons, classical music, repertoire from the Western classical tradition, playing in Western classical orchestras, that's not going to engage these kids who are out there listening to and loving music in their own way. Right. So I was there for about 5 years, and then I changed schools. And I was very fortunate. I got a position as a kind of advisory teacher, and I changed schools. And the 4 advisory teachers in my area were offered the opportunity to become part of a research project led by Professor Lucy Green. And the idea was that our 4 schools would become the pilot schools for this project, which later then became Musical Futures. So for a whole year, Lucy was in our school. She was working alongside me with our kids, working with a year group of kids. It was a new school to me. When I started, the school had 1 electric guitar and a broken drum kit. like many of these schools do. Kids who were pretty disengaged by year 9. Music was actually taught on a carousel as well at that point. So kids would only do music in year 9, which was kind of the pitched age range of musical features pilot. They only did it 1 term a year. So to be part of this, the school had to very quickly make some changes and say, well, hold on, this is a year-long project. So we've got to change this approach to music in the school. So from the very outset, musical features started to make changes for me and my school even before we even began the pilot.
That's
amazing. And then having Lucy in school working with the kids, we'd have a coffee after the lesson, we'd reflect together on everything that we'd seen, we had great chats, was amazing. And what I was being asked to do was completely new to me. It was, the kids are going to make these decisions. They can play whatever instruments they want, they're going to pick the music. Your job is to make this possible for them and to find ways of supporting them, and then together we'll look at what kind of needs they have in order to be successful at it. And it was just an absolute game changer. So that was around, I think, 2004, those original pilots in school. So we did that for a year with the pilot classes, but then obviously it was hugely successful and a bit of a game changer. So we started to do it with all the kids in the school. And then across the next 10 years, it just became the way we did things. And gradually over time, I was asked to come in and present our findings, what it was like to be a teacher, start to lead teacher training for other teachers. And so the model that you were part of now here in 2023 in Kobe actually started very early on as a result of sharing some of the practice in schools. And for those people who are not aware of it, musical features is very much an approach, a pedagogy to teaching music. It's not a curriculum. It's not a set of resources. It's a very reflective kind of process that you then lift, and it's hugely flexible. It was always designed from the outset to be put into the hands of teachers, to be flexible, but just to kind of say to people like me who'd come through this very formal music education, that might not be the best fit for your kids. And here's something else that you could draw on and that you could try to adapt the way that you're teaching and give the kids more autonomy, make your music program more student-centered. So across the 10 years that I was at Monk's Walk School, which was the pilot, my goodness, the whole school just came to life around music, and the take-up of kids opting for music GCSE went through the roof. The music department was where they wanted to be. And as a team, as teachers, we kind of learned how to make that work for our situation in our school. 1, 2, 3, I found my dream. And gradually, as the successes became more evident to school, they're like, yeah, hey, have some instruments. Yeah, you want some iPads? Okay, we'll provide those for you. There was always a kind of a backwards relationship that we had to prove the worth and the value of the approach, the impact on the kids, and then we could go and say, hey, look, can we have a couple more instruments? Could we have a little bit more space?
I was speaking with Peter Noonan, who also presented in the big gig in Kobe as well. We both agreed that we had been really lucky with admin who didn't really know where the program that we were trying to do was going, but they sort of trusted us and said, okay, let's do this, and sort of felt it out as the program progressed, So I guess it's not that different, actually. What you're describing there is very familiar to me, that I go in and say, okay, so deep breath, we need electric guitars and a drum set. And I just wait for that blink, blink, blink. They say, you need what? But my experience has been, knock on wood so far, that they've trusted it, not knowing exactly where I was going with it, but they've trusted it,
Yeah. And that's not always the case with admin, is it? I mean, you don't, certainly in the way that state schools have gone in the UK and things like that, budgetary limits, kind of external pressures on what schools are expected to produce and achieve means that giving your arts teachers that kind of trust to do these things, it really is a big leap of faith for some administrators, senior leadership teams to actually take. And we always found that we just had to use what we had. all the way through. I've always done that in my classroom. Do it first,
Well,
prove the worth, learn how to do it better, and then go with the impact statements, the evidence, the enthusiasm around it that you can only really get if you've done it,
right.
and tried it out first.
I
So
was laughing because when you said the electric guitar and the broken drum set, I was my first job, which at an international school, was in 1998 as well. Actually, before that, I was teaching at a language school in Ecuador, but I had moved to Venezuela and I was teaching at a school there. And when I arrived, they had I want to say it was like a Bon Tempi organ. Do you remember the Bon Tempi?
I do.
And they allowed me to buy, I believe it was 16 pairs of drumsticks. So like the chair drumming that we did in the big gig, which is one of the activities that you can do, that was necessarily what I did because all I had was chairs. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
We're doing
exactly.
this now as this like really cool way to approach something different in these schools, whereas I did it because all I had was drumsticks and chairs.
Yeah. but see, we hear this a lot, Jeremy. Just people come to our workshops or kind of get to know music teachers and say, look, this legitimizes what I have always done. You know, what I've brought to teaching from my own musical education experience, and I imagine yours was very different to mine. You know, we have teachers out there who've come through all these different musical routes to become musicians. You're a musician before you're an educator, aren't you? You know, it's not one or the other. So bringing in our own personal musical influences in ways that we want to learn and work with the kids is so important as well. And what musical features did, certainly in the UK, was it legitimized, it gave a name to what a lot of teachers already believed was a great way of teaching and a great way of doing things. And you know, musical features was never meant to be just about rock and pop music. Musical features was about this approach to how you teach and think about music. It's got its 5 principles there, lifted from a study of how musicians learn informally, and looking at, well, can informal learning really fit in a classroom situation? And if so, how does the teacher line that up with their own personal experiences and their personal musicianship as well?
What the school requires in terms of curriculum things or something from the Board of Education. You know, definitely that was, I don't know if I said this to you in Kobe, but I've said it to everybody that I've spoken with since. Is like when I first started doing those things, like hitting chairs, which felt to me at the time like, what am I doing? Like, is this good? And then as I found different ways to make kids love music, for one thing, I was talking to Chris Koelma. I was saying that I remember sitting down with a series of method books that they had gotten for the school because they were going to have a music teacher now. You know, it was like a new concept for that school to have a music teacher. They had bought some method books and I put them in front of the kids and we opened it up and it was like, I don't know, C major scale. And it was just, you could hear them looking at the books going, oh, you know, like all of the joy of music had left them. Not to say that there's something wrong with learning scales or learning how to read. I just think that, you know, when I think about what Musical Futures is doing and the stuff I've been reading from Edwin Gordon, thanks to Peter Noonan, who introduced me to that. But the idea of teaching music as a language, where if you think about how people learn language, you learn to listen first. At some point, you learn to imitate and can then repeat what you're hearing. At some part, you start to decode the symbols of that language, in this case, notes. And then you start to try and actually write it out. And I was doing it backwards. So as soon as I realized that, and I saw the kids, like, it doesn't take it a lot. It doesn't take a genius to read the room and hear that silent sigh, you know?
Totally.
And I said, hey, guys, what about if you choose the song? Because I know that based on this book here, I need to teach you like scales and chords and cadences and arpeggios and yada, yada, yada. But it doesn't say that I have to teach it through Mozart or through whatever was in that book, you know? So you guys pick. So they chose Destiny's Child. Survivor. So that was one of the things, but I also have questions because one of the things that I loved about Kobe was that that room of almost 50 people was really on the same page in terms of this being a good thing to be trying in your classroom, to be listening to students' voice and choice and giving more autonomy to the students. But then I also started to wonder, as a practicing music teacher, what about this? And how do you do this? So one of the things, if you talked about the 5 principles that are employed in this approach to teaching and learning.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just start at principle 1 because, well, it's number 1. But so, one of the things, principle 1 is about giving students that choice. So they learn music that they have chosen, right? That I've been doing forever. But over time, I've found that I struggle a little bit with the other part of it, is that I want them to learn about music they don't already know.
Yeah.
I also want them to know different things from all over the world, right? So I guess my question to you is, how do you approach that if the teacher's role is to step back, to analyze, to suggest, the roles that you showed us? As I'm saying this, there's magically that visual just right in front of us. It's amazing.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? How do you get students to approach and think about, learn about types of music they don't already know when they're meant to be choosing the music they play?
Okay, so much in that. There's so much in that. So first of all, we have a responsibility as music educators, right? If you let the kids choose the music for 9 years, it's going to be a very narrow experience, and they'll get bored and they'll get tired of it. So first of all, I wouldn't expect, it's not you have to let them choose. It's at some point when the time is right in your journey, give them the choice. So in terms of the actual pilot itself, that this in at the deep end, which is what those 5 principles, initially were based on, that was where they chose the music. But in subsequent stages of the pilot and beyond, there were experiments with, well, what happens if we give them the music? Are they less engaged? Are they more engaged? What happens if we introduce different genres of music and we give them an aspect of choice, but the choice is limited somehow, and we allow them to choose within a kind of a range of musical pieces. So that was all kind of embedded through the research in the first place. And of course, we found there was no disengagement as a result, because that first experience, that one acknowledgement, you choose, and the learning journeys those children went on as a result of having that choice initially and working in that way was enough to nail them into, right, now we want to learn more.
Music is a way of expressing myself in terms of writing a performance, it's a way of enjoying myself. It's a way to meet new people. Music industry is a form of income. It is everything. Everything. I will never ever forget the first nights of Les Mis with just under matinee. It was the first time we actually managed it, and the sense of relief and joy. Then going into the first night, I will never forget that sort of cocktail of emotions of relief and joy of just, it is spectacular.
And you talked earlier about the reading, the notation, the method books. We found that kids wanted to read as a result of the experience that they'd gone through and realizing the gaps, where the gaps were in their knowledge. And they were kind of writing down their own stuff, but in very rudimentary ways. And then they had much more interest in learning what it would be like to be written, or how they could better record their stuff. And now, in those days, we didn't have the technology we have now, but just using their phones to record their ideas and using technology in a much more integrated way that they can do now, facilitates all of that. But we need to guide them through that experience. So that's the first thing. And then I think there's just this awareness, really, as there's a whole world of music out there that our kids are immersed in their own life. And working internationally, there's 52 nationalities of kids here who've lived all around the world. We're not in one location here. Being open to the enculturation of the kids that we have in front of us, the passions and the interest in the music that really gets them buzzing, as teachers being open to that. So certainly when I first started teaching, the kids on the estate across the road were not listening to the same music that I was listening to in my car on the way home. So I had to make some effort to actually take an interest in what those kids were listening to and what really kind of ignited their passion about music. And then as time went on and kids had access to things like Spotify, or just some music on an iPod or phones, you'd hear them start to say, "Oh, that sounds like this. Have you heard that song? Oh, this is my favorite. I love this." And you'd find they were starting to share on their own kind of musical interest, but they were doing it in a musical way. So something had triggered that it sounded like something they were familiar with. And then it's easy for me to jump in and go, actually, did you know that there's also this, or there's that? So the whole experience becomes much more collaborative. But in order to build that very first, spark of interest, giving them that choice in the first place is where you can then layer over the top the bits of learning that we're required to teach, and our responsibilities as a teacher. And for goodness sake, I wouldn't want to impinge my own musical interest on my kids here, because how boring would that be? But let's all be open to each other's, and that's really important in fostering this community through informal learning, really, because it's through, if you're in a band, oh, I'm going to play this song because I love it, and somebody else will say, oh yeah, I want to play that song because I love it. And that's how bands go on their sort of experiences of building their repertoire or deciding who they are. Same in the classroom, I think.
Absolutely. I'm laughing when that last part, because I was thinking about when I was in a cover band a few years ago in Kazakhstan with some colleagues and some parents from the school, and we just decided to get a band together. And so they said, well, okay, music teacher, so how do we choose our songs? How do we choose what to play? Because we found very quickly that as much as we were similar ages and we sort of had a similar sort of style that we liked, one person would say, I want to do this song. Long story short, I said, okay, everybody in the band, and I just did what I do in my class. I said, everybody put in 2 songs. Yeah. We'll vote for which songs are going to happen in order, and we'll get through the list as much as we can, And yeah. Some of those songs, even though we loved those songs, we discovered it didn't fit, So that's what I do in my classes anyway, And for me, what you just said, I feel like, oh, thank you, because I do these things and I'm like, I don't know, is this what other people are doing? You're just telling me yes. So recently I told some students, some classes, I said, I'm going to give you 5 choices of songs based on certain criteria that I've set out for them, and then you guys pick from those 5. And nobody in the classes that I introduced that idea to complained about it or felt like their choice was being trampled on, because they know that this is more like the exception rather than the rule. The whole perspective has changed, where, oh, okay, Mr. Van gets to choose this time.
And that's okay.
Exactly.
Because you've got musical reasons for choosing. I think one of the challenges over the years talking about musical features is that teachers are a bit nervous about doing that whole in at the deep end thing. All of the things that could go wrong, they might choose an inappropriate song, there's all sorts of challenges with it, and they immediately start to put a few restrictions on it. So at workshops, we always say, just try it with one class. You can put as many, it's your teaching, it's your lessons, do it your way, but just try the in at the deep end, just try it once, and then you'll know. Because, as a teacher, you always come up with the challenges first, don't you? Well, this won't work because of that, and that won't work because I haven't got this. Actually, throw everybody, including yourself, in, and the learning from that is just so huge that you then realize some of the restrictions that you might have put on, you didn't need to put on.
Well, that comes to 2 things. One, I'll say them first before I explain, because otherwise I'll forget why I said there are 2 things. One is, in Kobe, the whole idea of the big gig is that we're learning as students learn. And then the other thing is principle 4, the holistic learning. I'm struggling with the idea of not differentiating the material. And I know there are different types of differentiation. So those are the 2 points that I'd like to explore a little bit. I loved when we walked in and you, Jennifer, and Chris introduced sort of what we were doing a little bit, and then one of the first things we did was play some songs. It was like very little chat before that. We just like grab an instrument, we're going to start doing this thing, boom, and we were doing it. And then you guys, after maybe 2 playing experiences, you said, okay, take an instrument now that you don't know how to play. And I was looking around and I was like, honestly, I play a lot of instruments. So the only challenge for me was to find one that I couldn't play in that room. But I found the sequencer, because Chris had those like really cool, the Roland stuff. And so I don't know how to play that. I don't know how to play a looper. I don't know how to, I don't know how to play any of that. And one of the other teachers as well grabbed the drum machine for the same reason, And that was such a seemingly small change. But for me, it was huge, because for the first time in years and years, I felt authentically like my students feel when they come into my class. They're playing something they've never, like I often say, I have kids who come in and they don't know how to hold the violin. And I don't mean like elbow out and hands back. I mean like they hold it like a guitar. They don't know. So that was a really cool, authentic experience. And I don't know if it was where I read or you had said, the big gig has always been about teachers learning from the perspective of students.
Yes. There's so much in what you just said, isn't there? There's so much. So first of all, if you think about this whole notion of how we learn, when you guys picked up those instruments, Chris didn't stop you. He didn't, this button does this button does that. It was just play it. And I noticed like he was working around as you guys were playing. He was facilitating something. He was kind of showing, modeling, demonstrating. All of that stuff is very different, isn't it? And I was at the Big Gig actually to talk more about primary and informal learning and using this technology with much younger children. It's the same thing. I can show them this device and try and explain what that is, but that's probably going to take the majority of the session. And like you said, we were just playing. So I think looking at how you approached it and how you problem solved, how you applied the musical knowledge and the social skills you have from being a musician to that experience, and then how Chris was facilitating from the perspective of the person that was holding the knowledge and the understanding of how it worked, and how those two blend together, I think is very much around what you're asking. So it's like, it's not about putting everything in place in advance and assuming that your kids fall into these different categories. So, let's say, for example, we're all doing keyboards. That child can only play 1 note, that child can play 5, and that's a grade 8 piano player, so they can play 6 notes. I'm not limiting the kids in any way in the way that they respond to the real piece of music that they're responding to. I'm letting them respond first, and then I'm kind of mapping the way that I go in and support this in the, in subsequent lessons or as we're working to that response. Do you see what I mean? So it's about not making assumptions first that everybody will start here and they'll go up like this in a very smooth gradient of progression and learning. It's about, originally Lucy called that 4th principle haphazard learning. This idea that you go up and down like this, and sometimes you'll start here and you'll only have got to here, but you'll have done it in such a way that the journey isn't really even mappable in terms of how you got from A to B. So I interpret that, and again, this all came from Lucy. Lucy gave an interview where she said, I think I had a chat with her actually. I just had a call with her, and it was just she and I talking, and that's where she said this. She said, I wish that I hadn't called it haphazard learning. I would have preferred it to be called holistic learning. And it was at that point that I then changed it in the slides and then tried to kind of present what I felt what she was explaining to me resonated with how I'd always taught in the formal system of these kids in boxes, you do this and we'll all do that, to how you can respond to the haphazard ways that people learn, especially musically. And then that role of the teacher jumps in, doesn't it, as to how you support the kids through that.
That's really cool. And I don't remember if this is something that I read or something that you said while we were chatting, but you said like that idea of changing it. It was like, so if it was a successful class and the name of the principal is haphazard, then people say, how was your class? Oh, it was really haphazard.
Haphazard. I know it's not what you want in your lesson evaluation, is it?
Doesn't really have a good ring to
music
it.
today. learning
Wow,
was
what a haphazard
haphazard.
class we just had. Not
But
really
again,
dull.
that very much came from Lucy. She said, I wish I hadn't chosen that word.
Yeah.
But again, you know, I'm paraphrasing a conversation that she and I had in discussion. And I'm sure that she's written and spoken about that more widely, you know, in different ways. But for me, musical features has become such an integral part of me and how and what I do and everything else, that when I'm talking about it, it's the way it's all of those core principles really have manifested themselves in practice, not just working with kids of different ages, but also with so many adults. Like, I've been very fortunate to be able to go to workshops and conferences and deliver this around the world. And every single time I learned so much just watching the responses. And in that oral learning session, you might notice I kind of sit back and just observe how you all responded to that. And again, Lucy very generously allowed us to use that. That was one of her original workshops. But goodness me, it's fascinating because every group of people approach it differently, depending on what instruments you've got in the room, the people in the room. It's one of my favorite sessions because, you know, there are some behaviors that are consistent. There are some responses are completely out of the blue that you don't expect. And unpacking that at the end of the session is absolutely fascinating, because if you then repeat that with your own students, you see exactly the same, you know, sorts of patterns emerge, which then again, how do you support those kids in your lessons to be able to achieve what we're asking them to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, I saw it in practice. For me, it was incredible because I don't remember the last time, like, once you know how to play stringed instruments that are plucked, and then you know how to play strings instruments that are bowed. I can pick up an erhu here in China, like a violin. They can sound really, really nice, even beautiful, or they can sound like the first time I tried to play it. I went, but regardless, when I picked it up and I started to play and I started to get some notes out, I didn't have that same feeling like the first time any one of us, especially I think of the guitar. I always use the example of a kid hitting the guitar for the first time, trying to get a chord, and it sounds like it's supposed to, like they want it to. You know, that feeling when your heart just skips a beat and it just feels amazing, right? I haven't had that feeling on an instrument for years and years. And it happened on that sequencer.
I actually have them here.
That'd be
Should I
great.
hold them up so people know what you're talking about? So
Sure.
this is these ones.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the drum machine. That's the T8, I believe.
That's the beat maker. And then I have the J6,
J6.
which is this one.
That's the one. That thing. So
and then we have a couple of
one thing, actually two. One, I know that you said in it when we were chatting just on WhatsApp, you said that you wanted to clarify one or 2 points that Chris and I talked about in our chat. We had said the wrong starting date for when the first big happened.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the musical feature has been around for absolutely ages, and it's been on such an interesting journey globally, and people connect with it at different times in its journey. So it's really interesting, and I'm one of the kind of last standing long time going back, you know, to that very beginning of the thing. So sometimes I'm just like, oh, actually, no, that's not quite what happened or when. But in terms of the big gig, I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on what it had been like to participate in that event, and also Chris's as well, from the perspective of, you know, what really makes amazing professional development for international school teachers. Because I think we'd all agree as international educators, it's different. You know, our needs and requirements around PD are different. We're really fortunate, but there's a few things that we're looking for and that you know might be a bit different. And so the big gig is a format which I feel really just ticks the boxes of what I believe makes amazing professional development. And those are, which I think we slightly touched on, experiencing it from the perspective of your students, whoever they may be. And that's always been absolutely central and key to how Musical Features has delivered PD. It's never been a dogmatic, you must do this, you must do that, and here's the method book. It's always been that, you know, this is what your kids might feel like. So how can we then learn from that and take it back into school? But the second one, which has grown out of the big gig, is engaging with professional development as a musician, you know, coming along and actually expecting to play music with other people. And working with the international teachers, which actually we first came internationally in 2016, which was the same year as the very first big gig, which happened in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia. And there were two big gigs, a lot, you know, with these big 2-day conferences with the actual remit. You will be expected to sing, play, scratch, rap, make music together, but do this as a musician. You're gonna have the chance, that social aspect of music that's so important. So the big gigs were kind of operating alongside the former kinds of workshops that took place within musical features. But what it's done with the international thing, and this is the third one, Kobe was the third one that I've been involved in, I think, and we have another one coming up at my school at the end of March, which I'm really excited about, bringing people in to see how we're doing it here at St Andrews.
Yeah,
there's one in Mumbai as well. So in every single big gig, as a thing, there's something about it. Like the teachers who come just smile and laugh and chat, the chatting and the kind of the zing in the room. It's really quite special. And I think it comes from that fact that you're engaging with it as a musician. And that's why musical features and the MTIIS started to really go, the big gig, this is what it's about. It's about this community of people.
I totally agree with that. And I think one of the amazing things as well, that could sound really intimidating when you say that you're going to be expected to play and do the. For all of us in different ways, it was a little intimidating at the beginning, especially when you said pick up an instrument that you can't play. And some people were like, yahoo, and they just picked up something and went with it. And some people went, I play the piano. That's what I play. What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? But then, you know, by lunch of the first day, I was salsa dancing with somebody I had just met. Thank you, Jennifer.
Exactly.
Walden. That was incredible. And then, you know, so there were so many things that came out of it that I think were just fantastic. And for that reason, it really felt so authentic. And, you know, people always look for good resources you can take back to your school. There was tons of that, but it wasn't what it was about per se. What I brought back to my school was, even as somebody who's been doing very much this sort of thing for 20 years, a better understanding of how to do it better. You know, like you said, we're all on this journey, we're all learning. I definitely didn't go in there feeling like, oh, okay, this is something I've been doing. Now I just know it, and I just don't even listen. Like, I learned so much and enjoyed every moment of doing it. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, because it's the same. It's the same for me. You know, I'm rocking up as a teacher as well as somebody who's got some stuff to share,
Right.
And it's just being part of something which is amazing. And we've throughout the years that I've been lucky enough to do these, you just see friendships made, actually, and connections like this one, where you know you can continue the conversation, and you found some like-minded people, and you felt like there's a sense of belonging musically to something where maybe you didn't necessarily feel like there was a natural fit for, or sometimes you go to PDs and you go, oh God, I'll sit through this and someone's going to talk at me for ages and I know some of this already, or you know, let's just create the space and the time to do it and reflect on it, and then chat to people and just feel part of something.
I had met Chris Koelma through doing this podcast a year ago, and I knew before going that I was going to interview him to reflect on what we had done. I had no idea that I would meet you and Jennifer and Peter and Desta and Stefanos and, you know, all of those people, like Hector, that, you know, these are all people that I really feel like we had a great weekend there, and then it continues forward. So that's why I ended up asking you and Jennifer and etc. Peter if you'd speak to me on here, because I feel like this is, I didn't want it to just end at that weekend, you know.
I was just going to say, like, as international educators, we need a network, don't we? You know, we need these connections with people who are doing what we're doing, but, you know, we're away from maybe our natural networks at home, and people like you who've been international for such a long time. There's loads to be learned from, you know, how you survive as an international teacher. And so the absolute best thing to do is just to come together like this, share the stories and learn from each other. And yeah, absolutely. So it's been really great for me as well to do that, feel part of this.
I felt super validated in what I've been doing for a long time. And I've talked about this in other discussions with people, but for me, it was really amazing. It was an eye-opening that I always felt like that in PD, like there was everybody else doing their stuff, and then me sitting in the corner going, I taught Black Sabbath last week, you
Yeah.
because that's what the kids picked. And people would look at me like, what are you talking? What are you even talking about? You know? And so it was
Yeah.
really special for me. I really enjoyed it a lot. One thing before we close off, first of all, I've said to you a number of times, because I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you
One
for
of-
the invite. Great chat.
Yeah, it's cool. I'd love to follow up at some point, because I feel like
Sure.
we could probably keep going. On
For
that
sure.
note, yes, is there a question that you wish I had asked that I didn't ask?
Wow. No, because because I think just having a great chat goes
Yeah.
off in all kinds of directions. So I don't think specific questions are always necessary, because you just talk around the stuff and then, yeah, loads to think about. So no, thank you for asking. But actually, I really enjoyed chatting and given
Wow.
me lots to think about and reflect on as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm really happy. So really, thanks very much.
It's great to chat, Jeremy. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Great.
Enjoy the
Have a
rest of
great
your day,
day.
Anna. Thank you.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Good night.